Good. Okay. Well, I guess I'll start again. Welcome to our paper session today. I'm happy to have you here. We have three exciting papers on our slate today. And so I think we should just go ahead and dive in to make sure we have plenty of time for the speakers. Our first speaker today is Jonathan Dawson. He's asked me to keep my introduction very short, so I will just say that he is a fellow of Schumacher College. He was one of the core team that created Gaia Education and was the author of the original economics module of the Eco-Village Design Education curriculum. And he now focuses on the transformative potential of critical pedagogy. So, Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Deborah. I'm very much an analog being, a mammal. I really struggle with speaking into particularly in storytelling mode, which I really want to adopt today. I can really struggle with speaking just into a machine. So I've got a friend who's sitting opposite me, with whom I'm going to be in conversation. So I'm going to use her as my sounding board and bask in her positive physical feedback. Yeah, so that's Roz. She's going to be with me. So it sometimes seems to me that having events like this is at least as much for the presenters as it is for those who are on the receiving end, because it really, one has to sharpen one's thinking to really think through. Or maybe, let me just say that on the 45-minute drive from home to here, that actually I've realized that the inquiry that I was undertaking in Israel in the first 3 months of last year was not primarily about the kibbutz movement. It was the focal point was actually somewhere else. The focal point was about the potential, like what is the potential role that intentional communities are being asked to play at this critical moment in our civilization's history. So that rather than the inquiry being primarily, exclusively, or primarily about the kibbutz, it was actually using this development that I'd heard about within the kibbutz movement, which was the development of these new urban kibbutzim, and what the lessons were we could draw from that experience that might inform the further question, which I think is at the real heart of my inquiry, which is into what is the role of does the intentional communities movement have a specific role to play in helping us move forward in creating a more joyful and sustainable world. Just one little word here in terms of my use of language. For current purposes, I'm happy that the term intentional communities covers both kibbutz and eco-village. I know there are differences between them, but for present purposes, I don't really need to distinguish between them. So I'm not, if you hear me moving between kibbutz and eco-village, it's not, it's primarily because I'm talking about my own experience, and it's not that I believe there are significant differences between them for my current purposes. So maybe the best place to begin, I want to explain, it seems to me that the inquiry that I was working on in Israel for the first 3 months of last year, that actually the seed for that inquiry was planted by Albert Bates in the farm maybe 20 years ago. Let me just give you a little bit of background there. That even when I spent a period as the president of the Global Eco-Village Network, and even during that period, I realized that I was something of a devout skeptic about eco-villages. The devout bit is clear that I've chosen to spend 24 of the last 25 years living in eco-villages. So clearly I'm sold on their importance and value from a personal point of view in terms of my own lifestyle choice. However, the skeptical bit was to do with what I saw as being that while eco-villages, there was a period where they had a very strong prefigurative role. They were really modeling the development of so many different ways of being, new ways of being, new technologies. I noticed during my time, recently I went to Findhorn for their 60th birthday, and I noticed that there's a range of Oroville is about the same age, Centre for Alternative Technology, just a little bit younger. There was this golden period in the 60s and 70s when land was cheap, when planning regulations were relaxed, and where the zeitgeist was highly utopian. And in this period, it was a golden period for eco-villages to play a prefigurative role in addition to simply being marvelous places to live. And so I wrote a little book on eco-villages. And in writing the book, I lost count of the number of times that I identified an instance of a technology, hardware or software, that had been introduced into a country through an eco-village. So it was clear that there was a period where they were really dynamos of innovation. And I really came to the conclusion during my period working for Gen that actually that period had passed, and that basically venture capital had discovered renewable energy, for example. There were many much larger agricultural box schemes. Findhorn had Britain's first CSA, community supported agriculture scheme. Really it was surpassed by organizations getting it and then replicating at a much larger scale. So my part of my skepticism about eco-villages was my observation that in an era of high land prices, tight planning regulations, and a zeitgeist that was no longer so utopian and optimistic, that actually their day, the crest of the wave had passed, and that actually the baton had been passed, the community's baton had been passed to the transition towns movement. And certainly in Guy education, where the curriculum is drawn from the experience of eco-villages, I noticed that the great majority of people coming were interested primarily not in creating eco-villages, but in taking the lessons from eco-villages back to their home communities. I also noticed that when you go to the annual gatherings of the eco-village family in Europe, that there's a lot of young people, a lot of youthful energy. But if you go to visit eco-villages, there's a lot of white hair. And so effectively the problems that young people have in terms of accessing housing, we're beginning to do better, but really we traditionally haven't done really well. It's been a rather wealthy, middle-class, privileged lifestyle. So that's the position that I'd been in. And then this is the point at which Albert came and knocked on my door and said, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, Jonathan, but would things change in a context of significant societal breakdown or unraveling or simplification? You know, if that were to happen, and I think Albert saw this earlier than most of us, that actually that was very likely to happen, that would that change the scenario? Would eco-villages in a context of significant simplification, even breakdown, collapse, would they have a much stronger role? And basically, I've been sitting with that question for a couple of decades, until the moment when I heard about the urban kibbutz movement, the emergent nascent kibbutz movement in Israel. And I really just followed my nose. I funded this research myself, traveled to Israel, spent a lot of time on both traditional and urban kibbutzim, and met a lot of wonderful people, Anton included, and had a fascinating time looking at moving between urban communes in Israel, seeing whether the role that they were playing could in any sense be considered to be much more politically relevant, much more prefigurative once again, or maybe catalytic, it might be a better word. So were they standing apart from, or were they actually getting immersed in and acting as catalysts and dynamos in amongst the communities that they're working within? So I spent almost 3 months traveling around Israel and being really blown away by the dynamism, the energy, the effectiveness, the impact of the urban kibbutzim that I visited. And I've got a long list here of the achievements. I'm going to point you in the direction of the paper that I've written. I don't want to go through in detail the many achievements. Just some headlines. So an initiative that that Anton is involved with is the Bustan initiative, which is it's an initiative born out of his urban kibbutz. Maybe, sorry, let me just pause for a moment and say that while the traditional old kibbutz, I'm sure you know this already, but they're very much rural based. They're very strong socialist, egalitarian model, which worked really well in the period before neoliberalism, when agriculture was a viable strategy, economic strategy. Whereas the urban kibbutzim are staffed by, Deborah, can you tell me when I'm at 10 minutes? I really should have set up a clock. Please just give me a warning for 10 minutes.
Yes, I'll do so.
Thanks. The urban kibbutz is, they're communards who have located not in the rural areas creating large agricultural settlements, but rather they've bought, they're living in inner city, in among the most disadvantaged cities in Israel. Many of them have bought flats, or in some cases blocks of flats. In the case of, for example, the kibbutz that Anton lives in. And they're working in education, community animation, the arts, building bridges between different ethnicities and communities in Israel, but really working powerfully as change agents and supporters of the most disadvantaged sections of the Israeli population. Quite a different profile from the traditional rural kibbutz. But there's certainly enough in common between them that they're calling themselves kibbutzim, and there are many important similarities. I'm just going to point to one, this term that I kept on hearing, tikkun olam, which in Hebrew means healing the world. And this being a really important motivation that both the traditional kibbutz and the modern urban kibbutz, drawing particularly in people like Martin Buber, like really important sources for both generations, being involved in really deep service. And I was really struck by how much time both the traditional kibbutzim, but particularly the urban kibbutzim, are spending studying, discussing, being together, going on holiday together, really deeply exploring, taking very seriously the question, how can we help repair the world? So even the secular Jews are taking this scriptural concept and adapting it to their own particular way of making sense of the world. So great. So beginning with, I just want to recap, beginning with my own inquiry into our intentional communities. Has their moment passed, or was Albert perhaps right in suggesting that they may have a stronger role in a context of societal breakdown, where the state is retreating? And certainly in Israel, in common with much of the Western world, under neoliberalism, the state has pulled back and left a lot of space that the kibbutz, the urban kibbutz movement, is helping to populate. So the context now, so the question I'm posing now is the experience of the Israeli urban kibbutzim providing a model for a greater role for intentional communities in helping to dynamize and democratize the service provision and community animation in these disadvantaged areas? In other words, are they moving our intentional communities, is there a potential for them to become not so much wealthy, rather privileged, gated communities, but to actually once again be at the heart of social political activism? And I just want to refer to, there's a couple of bits here I want to read. There's a resonance here with development of thinking, particularly within the anarchist tradition, of where the socialist tradition being strongly about state provision, large-scale state provision, often very, very bureaucratic, as opposed to what I see emerging for various different reasons in not just in Israel but in the Western world as well, often under the term co-production, being a context in which the state can no longer afford to simply be the nanny for the wider disadvantaged population, but rather that that a growing number of places are, I think Italy in particular, are finding ways of mining, drawing upon the genius of communities and behaving towards them not as the recipients of services, but actually as active agents in the design and delivery of services. Just want to read a couple of pieces. This is particularly true of something called the Bologna Regulation. This is from northern Italy. It's called the Bologna Regulation for the Care and Generation of Urban Communes, where the city and has entered into partnership with its own citizens in over 90 different pacts of collaboration. The projects fall under three general categories: living together, growing together, and working together. And again, I just want to read a little paragraph here about Bologna and the wider movement of which it's a part. So this approach starts by regarding the city as a collaborative social ecosystem. Instead of seeing the city simply as an inventory of resources to be administered by politicians and bureaucratic experts, the Bologna Regulation sees the city's residents as resourceful, imaginative agents in their own right. Citizen initiatives and collaboration are regarded as under-leveraged energies that, with suitable government assistance, can be recognized and given space to work. Government is reimagined as a hosting infrastructure for countless self-organized commons. So just to conclude, the excitement that I had in my time in Israel, it was less to do with developing a deep understanding of the kibbutz, although having said that, my learning was, I learned a huge amount about the kibbutz while I was there. But what I was really trying to satisfy myself about was, is what the urban kibbutzim in Israel, can we see their work, the model that they're pioneering, as opening a door towards a new model? It's almost like a yeast being thrown into the urban mix of a way of privileged people creating communes, and those communes being kind of the hub of multiple networks of initiative. Remember, just a couple more things. One is that I wrote a book chapter some years ago called From Islands to Networks, A History of the Eco-Village Movement, where I was tracing the evolution of the eco-village. Maybe 20 years ago, Findhorn really wasn't a Scottish community. It was based in Scotland, but it really, in common with most communities, had relatively little contact with its wider hinterland. Whereas today that's largely changed, and eco-villages increasingly, as with the kibbutz, are playing roles in networking and almost being the culture in the yogurt pot that is changing the flavor of their home communities. One final
9 minutes, Jonathan.
Good, lovely. Well, that sets us up nicely, because I love this quote from Ilya Prigogine, the Belgian chemist and Nobel Prize winner, who says, when a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. I'm going to read that again. When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. And definitely the research project that I will continue to work with for the time being is into, are we looking at, in the emergence of these urban communes, are we seeing the emergence of islands of coherence in a sea of chaos? Are these critically, do these initiatives have the potential to be catalytic animators of mobilizing the power of communities and making them less dependent on the large-scale top-down state-administered service provision? I actually thought I had an hour and a half. I didn't realize I had just 20 minutes, so I had to race through that. I hope I wasn't speaking too quickly.
Thank you, Jonathan. No, that was wonderful. We will take questions at the very end to make sure that each speaker has sufficient time to give their papers. So I'll go ahead and introduce our next speaker, who is Stephen Lloyd-Moffett. Stephen is a professor of religious studies at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. In communal studies, Dr. Lloyd-Moffett's work has been on the rise of monasticism in the Christian East and India. Recently, his focus has been on alternative spiritualities, such as wine and communities and contemporary communities of California. His paper today is titled One Taste of Community, Orgasmic Meditation as Community and Corporation. Stephen?
Yes, well, we are going to shift gears here a little bit, one might say, because we are going to talk about a community that is, my guess is, unfamiliar to most of you. So I will introduce OneTaste as an organization and their principal practice, which is orgasmic meditation. I will then talk about their spiritual teachings that arose from the movement. And once we're familiar with the group and their teachings, I'll focus on what we know about their communities. Finally, I'll try to put the movement into a wider social context. Let me share my screen so one can get a bit of sense of OneTaste. So OneTaste started in 2004 as a movement and a corporation dedicated to teaching a meditative, partnered clitoral stimulation technique as a tool for spiritual and self-development, as a tool for healing from past trauma and personal empowerment. I have a long section on sort of the precursors to this, because this did not begin with OneTaste. In fact, there is a long history of this meditative clitoral stimulation in the Bay Area with the Lafayette Morehouse, with Ray Vetterlin, and then the Wellcome Consensus. And I'm open to talking about that later on in the Q&A if you're interested in where this comes from. But it's basically the petri dish of sexual exploration of in San Francisco Bay Area in the 1960s. OneTaste itself was founded by Nicole Dawson. So let me give you a little bit about her background. Here are some pictures of her over the years. She grew up in the Bay Area as a single-parent household with her mother. Her father was quite distant and would later die in prison after being convicted of child molestation, likely including friends of the young Nicole. She studied communications in college and eventually became a linguistics PhD student at San Francisco State in the late 1990s, while also starting an avant-garde art gallery. Dawson reports that The death of her father, even though she was distant from her, led her to re-examine life and become interested in spirituality. She started studying the occult, theosophy, and eventually being drawn to Buddhism, even contemplating becoming a Buddhist nun. Her introduction to partnered meditative clitoral stimulation is a colorful story that she tells about being at a party one day and a Buddhist monk approaching her and saying, I would like to talk to you about contemplative sexuality. She tells this story in a TEDx talk that's been viewed over 2.5 million times, and I'll quote it here. Somehow, I found myself lying there with my legs open. I was where I always was. I was in my head. And then all of a sudden, the traffic jam that was my mind broke open. And it was like I was on an open road and there was not a thought in sight. There was only pure feeling. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had access to the hunger that was underneath all my other hungers, a fundamental hunger to connect with another human being. Now, this makes for a great story, a celibate monk introducing spiritual sexuality to someone. There's a little bit more complexity there, but she definitely took on this practice as her own. And just in terms of trying to understand the evolution of this, the three men who had sort of developed this deliberate orgasm are all older white men who were presenting it as a female empowerment technique. Dawson, who is a millennial, confident woman, realized that she could take the practice in places that they could not. She renames it orgasmic meditation, and explicitly linked it not so much with pleasure as the men had, but with spirituality. By the way, Dawson is an excellent marketer. Not only does orgasmic meditation become oming, which is quite consonant with the movements of spirituality at the time, she also sort of played off the slow food movement. She wrote a book called Slow Sex that sold well. Instead of having meetings, because who wants to go to a meeting, she called them turn-ons, and her experiences, experiences. I have to say, though, the choice of OneTaste strikes me as one of her less successful marketing decisions. It does sound vaguely sexual, but it actually comes from a quote ascribed to the Buddha that is, just as in the great ocean there's one taste, the taste of salt, so in enlightenment there's one taste, the taste of freedom. And my suspicion is she chose OneTaste as the name of her movement and her company to situate it more in the new spirituality movement rather than sort of the self-help sexuality area, because who doesn't want a combination of sex and Buddhism after all? The basic class to learn the Om technique was $150, and at least at the beginning, there were online classes and DVDs. The estimate of the total number of people who were trained in orgasmic meditation from OneTaste range from 30,000 to, I've also seen 300,000. It seems that Nicole and the company seem to be prone to inflating their numbers at times, as do most new spiritual movements, see Scientology. The movement began to take off in part because there was a profile in 2009 in the New York Times, and then the invitation to do a TEDx talk, as I mentioned. She also did a South by Southwest talk called Female Orgasm, the Regenerative Human Technology. Eventually, the influencer Khloe Kardashian put it on social media that she swears by Om, and she was also invited to be in Gwyneth Paltrow's popular social media conglomerate Goop. So it sort of took off over time. Now, one element that I need to describe here is the practice that's at the center of the movement. While OneTaste refers to it as orgasm, it is not how the term is typically defined. OneTaste redefines orgasm as the rising of energy, sexual energy, yes, but also emotive energy, spiritual energy. It's a state of being, or maybe to put it in a proper Buddhist framework, a state of becoming. And so to differentiate it from what most people think of orgasm, they call in the movement the more traditional understanding of orgasm climax. But the goal of OneTaste is a sort of ongoing orgasm where the energy rises between two people, the person stroking the woman, called the stroker, and then the woman. So in its website that is now offline, it says orgasm is a feeling in your body that arises and falls whenever you feel absorbed in connection with another. And thus you cannot orgasmic meditate on your own. It always requires a partner. However, it's a very efficient and refined process. I won't go into the specifics about how it unfolds, but it takes, in every instance, an session is exactly 20 minutes, 15 of those that are dedicated to direct clitoral stimulation, no more nor less. And there is a very precise way a woman is supposed to sit at this time with their bottoms off and tops on. By the way, there is no equivalent male practice. This is a consciously asymmetrical, female-centric movement. Nicole, like many people in this sort of area, wanted to link it to science. They've had professors at UCLA and University of Pittsburgh take brain scans of omers to see its effect upon the brain for treatment of stress, depression, and others. I haven't seen any results, but they claim to be quite positive on this. It's also very much in the startup world. OneTaste is founded in the Bay Area, right around the tech startups. So it was clearly a business from the beginning that she and her investors wanted to grow. With sort of Theranos level confidence, Dawson would announce to any group that wanted to invest that her orgasmic meditation movement would one day be as big as yoga or mindfulness in America. It was destined to grow and change the world, she proclaimed, like many startup founders. And indeed, it did grow. At its peak in 2017, it had 9 centers around the world, around 150 employees, took in about $12 million. Inc. magazine named it one of the fastest growing private companies in America for 4 years straight. Most of the revenue came from those $150 or eventually $200 classrooms, but access to Dawson herself arose so that that you could do an intensive with her for about $12,000 a week, and you could even do a year-long membership for around $60,000. There was also a closet industry of merchandise, branded t-shirts, organic lube, a branded Om pillow set for $184, Om leg warmers for the winter when you were naked from the waist down, was just cold. They even had a technology element to it that they created their own intranet called Om Hub that connect Omers, and they sold access to that for a monthly fee. Beyond the primary class teaching orgasmic meditation, much of the sort of self-help stuff would be familiar to anyone who has studied California self-help movements the last 30 years. A lot of reframing your past experience so you're no longer a victim. Things don't happen to you, they happen for you. Everything in your past is a gift. You need to be aware of your deepest desires, follow it. All of this is pretty generic self-help frameworks mixed in with pithy sayings. But Nicole really wanted her movement to be at the center, a spiritual movement. And she self-consciously wanted to create this. And there's a report that she told a confidant, a friend, that I really wanted to start a religion. The thing is, you can't sell God because you can buy God on Amazon. What I'm selling is sex, because you still can't get that on Amazon. Many people did not find OneTaste for spiritual reasons, but she saw herself as a spiritual teacher. So let me try to outline her sort of spirituality and sexuality vision. As I mentioned above, orgasm for Dawson is redefined as a spiritual energy. It's effectively like the Tao or Qi in Taoism. It's a spiritual energy that inherently seeks to harmonize and connect with others. I think it's fair to say that it sort of takes the place of God in the movement. In fact, in OneTaste literature, orgasm is always capitalized, like you would with God. The goal, as is found on many of the shirts and signs in the movement, is to be powered by orgasm. And what they mean by that is perpetual orgasm. There's a belief that stroking, as I call it, can lead to a hyper-focused state of flow that continues long beyond the actual practice. Dawson hoped that the adherents would wake up to the power of orgasm and allow the orgasm to guide one's life. She calls this perpetual orgasm in one spot. She calls it being totally turned on for life. But it's this idea that you have this higher energetic plane coming from oming. And this is not just for the woman being stroked, but the attuned stroker, which could be either a man or a woman, is said to merge into oneness with the person being stroked. They even have this notion that they become sort of metaphysically connected and bound together. Dawson told one reporter, in the same way that we have a virtual internet, we create a global limbic internet, an orgasmic internet, where we can read each other instantly. Dawson loved to remind people that every one of us on the planet, all 7 billion, she would say, share one fact. We came into the world because at least one of our parents had an orgasm. So orgasm is the collective human story. And orgasm is the source that binds people. She says very much in the way meditation, you plug into the cosmic consciousness, this is where we both plug into the one orgasm that has always been there. So the power of orgasm not only connects the adherents to others, it can transform and heal people, particularly from past trauma. Now, Dawson grounded this idea in a sort of metaphysics that was presented in a sort of fall mythology that occurred within humanity. So our fallen nature is screwed up because it's grounded in a deep cultural fissure that promotes separation of body, feeling, mind, and spirit. Modern humans are, quote, unintegrated and too stuck in their mind, which she liked to call the cortex, I think a reference to the cerebral cortex. The cortex is the site of cultural judgment, inhibition, and competition. And orgasmic meditation becomes a unique tool to bring us outside of our cortex and into a somatic, empathic, and spiritual whole again. Dawson claims without evidence that orgasmic meditation puts you in the exact same state that enlightened Tibetan monks gain. And there is a sort of Zen-like ritual process and formality that happens, a sort of Japanese tea ceremony for the clitoris, so to speak, with each motion and movement dictated to precision to create what they call the container, which allows for the discovery and transfer of spiritual energy. Now, once the meditative dyad, the two people have regularly called upon the spiritual energy of orgasm, the perpetual turned-on individual is said to develop spiritual powers. At one point, she says, those in perpetual orgasm will have telepathy and even mundane power. She promises that you will have the ability to change traffic lights when needed, bring money or any person into your life. But most of all, you will recognize the OneTaste practitioner by the fruits of their orgasm, because there's a sort of verve that comes with embracing the orgasmic power within you. She calls the ideal personality type the hyper-volatile, because orgasm will give you a certain unpredictable and empathic character to you. You don't want to sort of channel or box in the orgasm, but you want to allow it to express itself in all of its form. And she contrasts this to the male-dominant right brain world that we live in, which is a sort of sinful state that stifles the orgasmic energy. But I have to say, she is very concerned that the power of orgasm can be misused in malevolent or negative ways. The term she uses is messed, so that one can curse one another or cause misfortune in your life. And one former devotee had been shunned from the group, ascribes a series of freak accidents he experienced after leaving the group to the malevolent manipulation of the power of orgasm. As with many spiritual movements, OneTaste was explicitly evangelical. They wanted to share their own wisdom with others, which they called sharing their orgasm with others. And those who were committed to the movement were called the great messengers of orgasm. Nicole herself was the high priest of the movement. She knew the power of orgasm and she could use to harness it. And this often came out in powers of observation. She would offer direct insights that came from the orgasm itself. She called them strokes that were sort of prophetic utterances. She's common in these areas to point out that so and so would need this or that, and she would even have prophetic sights from the orgasm that plastic surgery is now okay, or open relationships. Over time, she developed a magic school of orgasm. This is a sort of esoteric part of the movement. They would have these ornate rituals in an exclusive mountain retreat. And this would include piercings, white robes, bestowing symbolic necklaces on a group of people that she determined were the high priests and priestesses of orgasm. And these people would commit their orgasm to the OneTaste organization for eternity. And another sort of echo of Scientology. Also, Dawson promised a sort of apocalyptic orgasmic conclusion to the world. She announced that the Maitreya, a messianic figure, would soon come to the world and announce the age of orgasm, or at other parts she calls it the era of orgasm. Now, the Maitreya was not a single person, but the movement itself, which would bring an end, which would bring the end of the current era and announce the era of orgasm, where, quote, turned on women and the men that stroke them transform the world. So how does this lead to community? Well, one of the central projects of this world transformation is the orgasmic meditative houses, called the Om houses, where people lived in communal living environments with near monastic dedication to orgasm. The first Om house was opened in 2006, called the Warehouse. It had up to 50 residents, and by the way, no doors in the entire house. Originally, Nicole lived in this house for a couple of years, but she moved out and assumed a more traditional role as the reclusive and the mysterious guru in 2008, when the second Om house was opened. It was in a converted hotel, and it was called 1080 for the address on 1080 Folsom Street in San Francisco. Another one opened in Brooklyn, New York. These two were the only ones that were owned by the OneTaste Corporation. But by one count, there were 33 Om houses recognized by the organization, most of which were founded by adherents to the movement independently of the corporation. At its peak, there were 5 in New York City alone: Harlem, Hell's Kitchen, Soho, and West Village. There also were international Om houses in Copenhagen, Sydney, and London. While the numbers are difficult to verify, individuals close to the organization report that of the 35,000 people who attended in-person events in OneTaste over the years, about 400 people chose to live in the Om houses. And this number is roughly in line with one study from 2013 that found 7% of the Om community lived in Om houses. The demographics are hard to come by, but it seems like most of the residents were white, late 20s, 30s, childless, heterosexual or bisexual. There was some diversity, not much, but 2 of the original founders in San Francisco were lesbians of color. Those living in the Om houses were most dedicated members of OneTaste, who hoped to integrate the power of orgasm into their everyday life. Their routine, we know, usually began with 1 or 2 Om sessions between 6 and 7. By the way, the routine evolved over time. It's not consistent across every house, but typically begins with an Om session. This would be the first of 3 to 4 Om sessions per day. Remember, each one is 20 minutes. In San Francisco in the early years, they would then have a half-an-hour fear inventory, which is derived from sort of the 12-step movement. And at times that would devolve into a sort of Gestalt-style processing mechanism where people would list their fears and confront aspects of their life that were holding them back, which they called resistance. They also had weekly meetings with what transpired over the past week. These could often be highly charged, and later some residents called them abusive. They would confront one another with a truth, which they called verbal stroking in the lingo. the deficiency in one's character were called blind spots, and the areas of their orgasm that they weren't aware of. There's also yoga and meditation traditionally came a part of that too. Each night, the resident were assigned bedmates who were called research partners, and they labeled their community a research community rather than an intentional community ashram or commune. And for the most part, people saw these quite positively. Their primary element was oming and other practices to do sexual liberation, but they also had more mundane experiments in communal living. For example, in the warehouse, they would experiment not being able to feed yourself. So for a week, you had to feed the person across the table from you. They had these experiences where members would be naked and everybody would write on their body. If a couple broke up, your primary research partner broke up, sometimes they would put them next to each other to sort of confront jealousy. As I mentioned, there was no doors in the original warehouse, including toilets and showers to encourage vulnerability. So much of the sort of experiments in communal living were more common. The culture sought to reverse the shame that came with wanting to have sex with others, but it also was not seen as a sort of frat house fantasy of girls gone wild or something. Rather, there's a culture of communication and consent, and it almost seems quaint. A house member, if you're interested in another house member, would ask for what they called a makeout session. And it could start off as a makeout session, but that could lead to more. There was lots of experimentation in sexuality, including BDSM and kink culture, but that was actually pretty popular in San Francisco, Brooklyn, Austin, all the places where these home houses were amongst the hipsters there. They had the typical fights, especially they report fights about doing dishes, but overall people had a pretty positive view of their time there. One former resident said, "It's an amazing thing to come home in laughter, dancing in the kitchen, to spontaneous cuddle sessions, vulnerable hearts to hearts in the hallway, movie nights with new flirtation that just moved in, group hugs around housemate breaking down in tears, excitement, pain, joy, sorrow, all was welcome here." One of the interesting aspects of the spiritual communal living is that often many of the residents in the Om houses were also employees of the OneTaste Corporation, though not all were. And while the resident employees would get paid by the organization through incentive schemes that seemed to be constantly changing, much of the labor was volunteer, typically and typical of growing intentional communities. They were told they should just be happy to support the movement they believed in. One resident recalled, "When I first joined OneTaste, it was a real utopia. We were all young, full of energy, and without a doubt in our mind. We worked 18-hour days, stayed up all night laughing. It was a magical and beautiful time before we crashed from no sleep." Typical of other spiritual movements of this era, like Nexium and the Rama Institute or Love Wins, there was a conscious blend of capitalism and spirituality that eventually led to abuses in this area. When a Om house resident was truly devoted to OneTaste, it would say they would sell more products to people, and you had to be turned on to be a good salesperson. In fact, if there was a big sales pitch where you were trying to get people to sign up for classes, the salesperson would be required to do multiple Om sessions before the sales call. There was a lot of pressure to upsell potential clients, especially for expensive classes, and occasional pressure for members were encouraged to translate their turned on reputation into actual sex to get sales. And then there was pressure to renounce their promised commissions. Instead, they were told to invest in their income in the higher calling of spreading orgasm around the world. And it was this toxic blend of capitalism, spirituality, and gurus that led to the downfall of OneTaste. In 2018, Bloomberg ran a story outlining abuses by founder Nicole Dodone and her primary lieutenant, a woman named Rachel Churwich. It was revealed that in 2015, OneTaste paid a six-figure out-of-court settlement to a former employee and Om House resident who claimed to be sexually assaulted and harassed. In 2020, the BBC did a podcast expose called Orgasm Cult, which made further charges of impropriety. And finally, in 2022, a Netflix documentary called Orgasm Inc. aired with footage that not just implicated the founders, but pointed to exploitation of vulnerable members, condoning physical abuse, actions that appeared at least in the vicinity of sex trafficking. OneTaste as an organization disappeared in the early 2020s. In June of 2023, Dawson and Traugot were charged by federal prosecutors in Brooklyn, New York, on a conspiracy of forced labor and forced sexual exploitation. They are currently out on bail awaiting trial and have launched a new sexual wellness company called Eros Platform. So, as scholars of intentional communities, what do we make of this movement and their experiments in intentional living? We'll end with a couple of thoughts. First, I think we need to situate Nicole Dawson in a wider trend of the 2010s of what I call girl boss gurus. These are strong women-led movements such as Guru Jagat's Rama Institute, Amy Carlson's Love Wins, Teal Swan's Headway Foundation. They came to prominence at a time at a moment in American culture that was particularly open to female leadership, perhaps for the first time. They all effectively employed social media to gain widespread attention and followers. They all created communities and corporations and blended those two. And they were all accused of abuse. Two of them are now dead. One is indicted, and the last, Teal Swan, is mostly in hiding. Second, we need to situate OneTaste in the spirituality startup movement of the 2000s, where spirituality and unapologetic capitalism were fused. We see this in the four girl boss gurus, but also in NXIVM and a different way, the WeWork saga. The mixing of profit incentive and the more traditional prophetic aims, so profit and prophetic, created a toxic and at times abusive environment. And yet there was not the same social condemnation connected with linking spirituality and money that had existed throughout history. And so we can have a wider discussion on this, but I think this is where Nicole Dawson and OneTaste fits in. Now, like many charismatic leaders, Nicole Dawson has reimagined and repurposed herself while she's awaiting trial. The Eros Sutra study, you can join them in about 15 minutes, as you can every day, to hear about this new movement happening. So it will be interesting to see what the future of Nicole Dawson and orgasmic meditation holds, the next chapter in the story of orgasm. So that is OneTaste and orgasmic meditation. And I'm open for questions at the end, I believe, right?
That's right. Thank you, Steve. All right, why don't we just jump into our next paper, which is by Michael Traugot from the Farm. Michael is a founding member and longtime resident of the Farm, a U.S. intentional community in Tennessee. He received his BA from Harvard in 1967, his MA from Fisk University in 1998, and his PhD from UC Davis in 2011. He currently teaches at Columbia State Community College in Tennessee. The title of his paper today is COVID Comes to the Farm. Michael?
Hello. All right, well, interesting. So the paper I wrote was about COVID coming to the farm, but it really reflects on the whole larger world perspective, you know. Getting back to some of the other presentations about, like, we got to have a broader effect, and we can't just have our little bubbles. Our little bubbles are, I'm thinking of something that Helen Jarvis had about, you know, the early adapters, you know, the innovators. The communities have been innovators. Some of the early adapters. The thing is, how does it become acceptable to the majority? What comes through, you know? Like the farm started out as we were totally vegan. We were not going to do any animal products. Well, America, you know, I still think that's the healthiest way to go, but a lot of people are going the other way, wanting to get in meat diets and all that. But vegan and vegetarian has really, it blossomed out. Like many, what happened is capitalism finds out about it, venture capitalism finds out about stuff, and now you can buy tofu anywhere. Well, when we start out, we pioneered tofu, you know. So there are ways to influence the broader culture. Been about up and down, you know, and now we're at another crucial point. You know, the farm was founded during the Vietnam era, right after 1968, MLK, you know, Robert Kennedy, both being assassinated, losing the election to Nixon. Nixon keeps the Vietnam War going 5 more years. Pretty bad stuff. And we were like, well, what are we going to do? We kind of expected, we were talking about, well, what we're doing here is going to be a seed and it's going to spread throughout the world. And it has, but there's also been counter tendencies. So what do we do now? You know, the farm, we're still here. We adapted, unlike some of the other have been mentioned. We adapted. We had to put everybody on their own economy. And we had a huge debt to pay off, and it was pretty hard for a while, but in the end, a couple hundred of us stuck it out, paid off the farm after the collapse of the overblown communal. We didn't know when to say when, you know, for various reasons. We kept the gate open and kept more and more people coming in. There weren't any jobs. All this stuff is it's in my book that's coming out, but it's fairly well known and has happened to a lot of communities. So we're still here. We got maybe 230 people. A lot of people want to live here, but the incoming people is slow because we have a process, and we really don't want to overload. We're trying to avoid the overloading thing. But how do we influence the greater society? Culturally, we've influenced the greater society in many ways, but politically, you know, you look around at the United States. I mean, the fact that we actually could have polls saying these people are even. I mean, how much progress have we made as a country, you know, given that? So what do we do? You know, we, the farm, live in a state where most of the people, the conundrum is we get along really well with our neighbors and always have. The story I told in a private session earlier was we came here, we could have voted ourselves into control of our precinct in the county. There were 3 county representatives. We could have voted all 3 of them in. We decided not to do that. At one point we had 2. Usually we just had 1. So we had 1 representative on the county commission. We could have had 3. So, and we have always reached out and helped. We came up with something called Plenty, which has reached out and did help in Guatemala and Bangladesh, and you know, we're still working with Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, various Indian reservations. So all this stuff is pretty well known. When we first came to the farm, we did have a charismatic leader, and we were all united, and we were a communal meeting. We had one economy, and so we together could decide what to do politically. We helped vote out the political machine in our little county. We anti-nuke. We had a band. We had a rock and roll band called the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the real one. You know, they all dressed up in rad suits and, you know, had smoke and all that kind of stuff. Well, there haven't been any new nuclear power plants built. We helped to slow that down anyway. I don't know, we haven't stopped it. We still have, Tennessee has a bunch of nuclear power plants that are old, so we don't know what's going to happen. We helped keep a dump off they wanted to put a refuse dump on the Buffalo River, you know. We helped stop that. Folks down the road wanted to put a training ground, shooting ground for kind of mercenary troops, you know, like Blackwater kind of thing. We managed to stop that. Folks wanted to sell a trash burning incinerator as a means of getting rid of the extra trash, downwind, upwind, we would have had the flume of it, And the thing is, and the thing that us and the neighbors have all agreed about is preserving the environment. But people in Tennessee in general are pragmatists, are realists, love their hunting and fishing, and they love their trees and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we found some unity with the local folks. And also, most of the folks, they're whatever their religious things are, there's a lot of charitableness. There's a lot of charity organizations. I hear this from my students. They grew up around here, a lot of them. I teach at community college, right? And they all volunteer in their church and do that kind of good works and all. But somehow politically, this is a gerrymandered red state. The Democrats get 30% of the votes and have 10% of the power. No power in the state. There's 100 or 99 representatives in our state legislature, and Democrats have about 20, even though we get 35% of the vote. So it's totally gerrymandered. We're in this kind of a situation here, and yet we get along day to day with our neighbors, and it's kind of a conundrum. But I think a lot of people have realized that alone isn't enough. We have to somehow have more influence, and so I'm hoping that we can keep talking about how some communities have really tried to get politically involved, support candidates, that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is the new people who want to come to the farm are not as, ever since we had to go through the privatization of our economy, and this is 1983, so we only had 12 years of being totally communal. We still own the land together. We're still do all our decisions together, all the voting members. You'll see in my article, our voting turnout here is 96%. I mean, we all vote here, but there are people on the farm who don't even register to vote locally. Politics. That was a common feeling among people. Oh, we reject that whole old thing. Let's go out here and do our old thing. Well, great for a while, but now what? Those things have come and gone over the years. So what do we do now? Then I go to teach at Columbia State, and these are largely white local people who grew up here locally, went to high schools here locally, and things are changing. Tennessee's changing. There are monuments, there are signs up and everything for the Trail of Tears, where the Indians were paraded through on their way to Oklahoma. The plantations that are, the where everybody visits, the grand plantations from the old day, the pre-slavery. Now they're starting to have memorials to the actual slaves and actually name them, give these folks names. They were real people. They lived here, that kind of thing. So there's kind of a new South thing happening in Tennessee, but it's not the majority yet, and it's hard to get the young people vote. Well, so my point is, these young people know all about this stuff, and they all heard about Martin Luther King in school. They study that. At least they go that far. But most of them are not registered to vote. And if they have you been taught civics in high school? Minimally, So how do we influence the bigger picture? Because we're doing a resiliency thing with the Global Eco-Village Network. We're one of 20 eco-villages all over the planet who are exchanging ideas, doing self-analyses, and how can we adjust? We're going to have a global warming is continuing. What can we do? Water conservation, forest management, growing more food locally, that kind of thing. We're all doing that, but a lot still depends on who wins elections and what party's in power and how much power they have. And to try to get communards interested in getting back into actual politics and voting for the lesser of two evils kind of thing, some of the most enthusiastic youth are like, forget all that stuff, forget the lesser of the evils. They kind of forget that the greater of the evil is actually more evil, you know. And I've picked up on you know, the folks in Israel. That's encouraging. You know, Israeli Palestinian. There are groups there that are trying to, you know, get together and figure out what do we do. You know, if the common problems that we have, global warming, how to adjust to that, how to avoid nuclear war, how to avoid war in general, which how can you say that when all these wars are raging? But that war is going to destroy us. You know, we have to start thinking globally. We have to start thinking as a species. How are human species going to make our life sustainable here on the planet? You know, and I know there's intentional communities that are totally anti-vaxxers, and there's other, you know, societies that are like the farmer, mostly vaccinated. And we had, that's what my article is about, is our big struggle about it. Because it's like the horseshoe. I've heard it described as the horseshoe, where the left and the right come together. Both of us don't trust big corporations, big government, but some of us realize we have to deal with it. We just have to deal with it. You know, maybe the Mayan Empire broke up and they all retreated into the jungle and started. Well, there's no jungle to retreat into anymore. You know, there's 8 billion of us on the planet, so we're going to have to get along, or else we're going to have a lot of way more destruction than is happening now, which is hard to believe. But you know, there's enough weapons on the planet to turn big cities into what's happening in Gaza right now if it gets out of hand. And so what can we do? We're going to have to get involved in the broader world. What happened on the farm? Some of us original farm first generation were shocked that some of our younger folks are saying, we don't need to be vaccinated. Your natural immunity will take care of it. There's people walking the planet now, young people in America, who have never been vaccinated for anything. They didn't get their childhood stuff. They didn't, not polio, smallpox, or nothing. And they're walking around saying, hey, I'm in great shape and I never got vaccinated. And they are not acknowledging that they don't understand maybe the reason they can do that is because everybody else did. Because all the previous generations all got vaccinated, we wiped out. Well, an alumnus from the farm helped wipe out polio in India, you know. Farm alumni have gone on and done incredible stuff, you know, organic farming, and one of them helped write the organic, you know, official organic requirements that we have here, leading in cannabis research, lots of stuff like that, where we've been a nest for reaching out and changing things. And you know, but we have to be more directly involved, I think. You can't dodge what's happening in the world. So some of our folks here who didn't want to get vaccinated, we're talking about, you know, can't trust anything in that world. You know, blank it out. I think that's a tendency that we've had to deal with. You know, how did the one generation communicate its experiences to the younger folks? Realize that, you know, we came up during the civil rights, Vietnam era. We used to have my high school. We had nuclear attack drills. Now they have shooter drills in schools, but we had nuclear attack drills. Get under your desk, and I mean, yeah, haha, right? So we came up, and then Vietnam, of course, every male had to, you know, decide, you're going to go to Vietnam, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to leave the country. Came that simple, you know. Riots in the cities, Chicago, 68 Democrat convention. We're a product of that. I was in SDS before I was ever a farm. What changed me from SDS? I was looking, so I can't blame it all on the what can I say? Entheogens, you know, psychedelics. Psychedelics turned a lot of people away from violence and towards a spiritual approach to life. You know, you can't become what you don't like. You know, if you're nonviolent, you can't be violent. And that's one of the things that's gotten the farm through 50 years, of all the changes we went through, from commune to co-op. And what we're doing now as the first generation are starting to depart this plane, you know. What are we going to be like in another 50 years? I don't know if anybody's asked that question about these communities, you know, but what are we going to be like in 50 years? So, and all that, you know, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I can say that, you know, when we did have a spiritual teacher and we're totally communal, we could decide we'll be political here. We're going to do this. You know, now we don't want to. The population here has decided we really don't like as we have as few rules as possible, and nobody's going to try to make anybody else's politics be what it is. As long as you're nonviolent in the community and treat each other right. So we're not really. Somebody was talking about how, you know, capitalism, corporate capitalism kind of colonizes people, you know, and now there's people on the farm who really, there's a few people I think who are basically operating on trust funds, you know, and there's other people who, my wife and I are both in our late 70s and we both still working, you know, because we have to. So there's big difference there. The one thing we have is we pay for land. You know, we put in our time. This has been our investment. Some people invested in their careers. We invested in this piece of land, and that's our prize. And that's what we need to use to. People come here for forest bathing. People come here for spiritual experience of the land and the vibrations on the farm, because we consciously decided to be nonviolent. People think the vibes here are really good, and I agree, you know. So anyway, I guess some of the takeaways are you can't dodge the bigger picture, you know. All the phases the farm have been through, like in our first phase, we were totally revolutionary. Well, what was that? What else was happening? Well, Black Power, countries all over the world, colonies revolting against their European controllers, you know, Algeria, Vietnam, you know, Kenya, Tanzania, Rhodesia, you know, revolting against all the colonialists. In a minor way, we were revolting against our against America. Then they came 1980 and the backlash, you know, the Reagan Thatcher era, and the farm. We went through a changeover. We put everybody on their private. Everybody had to pay their own dues. We had to cut out services, and you had to pay for your services now that used to be free and voluntary. So we kind of reflected what was happening in the bigger picture. And so it was a bit of a shock. When you think about it, it's no surprise that we had our own version of anti-vaxxers, anarchists. For a while, people were on the farm were saying, we like anarchy, we like anarchy. Well, they didn't know what that was about. They weren't they hadn't read any of the anarchist people or anything like that. They were just thinking, no rules. Nobody telling me what to do. Nobody can tell me what to do. You know, well, humans we're a group, kind of. We're evolved in groups, in small groups, and so we need to be sensitive to each other. And that's one thing the community has really done. That's one thing our small communities have really done. We've pioneered in the kind of relationships, how to keep relationships at a heart open level, so we're not throwing weapons at each other, you know. So we've had a big cultural influence. The farm has, and all these communities have. but can we help put it together now to get some results of it globally? And I don't think it's going to be whether individual communities eat meat or not, or get vaxxed or not. The question is, can we unite around a few things like, let's keep the planet habitable and sane, and let's not tear each other up. And maybe we can find some universals that will spread beyond the communities movement and global eco-village network and all that. All these things are wonderful, and they're the hope of the world, you know. I don't know. It may seem funny, but you know, for my students, I've been playing Taylor Swift's song about voting. You know, she came out, only the young, you know, look it up sometime, only the young. I mean, Taylor Swift is out there encouraging the youth people to get involved. And I find I can't even get some farm youth interested in registering to vote. So, and also the like I said, the kids, the late teen, early 20s in my classes from around here, they also have not registered to vote a whole lot. Tennessee.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
I think it's about time. So could you wrap up with a final sentence?
I will try because there's so many. What I'm realizing is all these themes come together. All these themes come together, and you know, I hope we keep working on it, but not just at the matter of not only forest management, but also reaching out and connecting with the local folks. You know, and I mean, in America, that's what the Republicans did. They started locally and they kind of took over local government and state government and all that. And it's starting to come back around in Tennessee, and we're being a part of it. There's a lot more I could say, you know.
Well, we appreciate what you did, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
Why don't we open things up for questions, because we don't have much time left, but we do have time for a couple questions. So if you want to use the raise hand function, that's one way to do it. Okay, I saw Cheryl's hand go up. So Cheryl, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
There we go. My question is for Michael. You mentioned briefly the big changes that you went through at the farm, the reorganization from having a charismatic leader and for communal ownership of property. What part of this big reorganization had the biggest impact on your personal life?
Well, I had, you know, 5 children, and I was teaching at the farm school, and basically wasn't going to get paid anymore. They didn't have budget for it. A lot of people sent their kids to public school. It became where if you wanted to do the farm school, you had to you had to have a middle class income or something. You had to I mean, we kept it. It was all, you know, middle class income farm wise just meant you had any income at all. But it really people all of a sudden we weren't all on the same page. We weren't all going for the same thing. Each individual family had to go and take care of itself, which is the model of humanity over time. The individualization. We managed to we own the land together. We make all our decisions. You know, our board of directors can't spend more than like $7,500 without running it through the whole community and having a vote on it. So we still have a lot of communal stuff, but individually it forced a lot of people, most people left, but are still connected. It's amazing how connected we are. More of us in California than there are here, as there's probably more Jews in New York than there are in Israel, you know. That kind of thing, the diaspora of the farm. We got another question.
Yeah, let's see. Luval, question? Can you unmute?
I have a question for Jonathan or maybe Anton about these urban kibbutzes. I was wondering what is their economy based on? Are they just getting subsidies from the state of Israel, or what?
I'm gonna I'm gonna leave the first word to Anton, who is much closer to the on the ground than I am, and maybe if I may come in with something after he has spoken. Is that okay, Anton?
The economy of our kibbutz, we're 150 people. Our income is from the things that we do. We don't have funding for us as a kibbutz. We work. The stuff that we do in the neighborhood, in the community, in the region is mostly, nearly all through our non-profit organization. But we do it not as volunteer work, but as our day jobs. We run school, we run the neighborhood school, we run the neighborhood kindergarten, we run projects in the neighborhood, and we bring in wages for those projects. And those wages we all pool together as a full income sharing community, and that's what we live off.
Jonathan, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that among the communities that I visited, education is probably the biggest single activity where people are. I mean, something I find really interesting and puzzling is that like I live in a community. I've lived in communities for the last 25 years, and just the work involved to maintain a coherent community already takes all we got and more. Oscar Wilde, the problem with socialism is it takes up so many evenings. But these guys are not only building coherent communities, but they're also out doing, splendid work in the community. So it's like doing both together. I think that's what is distinctively impressive. And so the income they're generating is from their own activities that are funded, and their salaries, particularly in the field of education.
Thank you. Do we have a question from Cheryl, it looks like?
Yes, I had a question for Steve. Could you talk a bit about kind of how the dynamics worked in the Ohm houses? So if people came in with a partner, were they allowed to stay with that partner? Or if they came in single, were they assigned a partner, or did they have to choose one, or how did that dynamic work?
Yeah, well, so it evolved over time, and it wasn't consistent throughout. Certainly from 06 through 13, partners, monogamy was really frowned upon. But you would be assigned a research partner, or you would get to choose your research partner. Both would happen. And you could sort of dedicate yourself to a research partner for a particular extent time and then sort of break up. And they actually talk a lot about jealousy issues of former research partners with new research partners. The beds, though, there was always 2 people to a bed every night. So if you didn't have a particular research partner, you kind of fell into a research partner each night. And at least in the warehouse, there were no walls between the beds. It was just one big warehouse. Though in 2013 or 2014, Nicole Dodone got a stroke from the larger orgasm. In other words, she got a prophetic insight that monogamy is actually good. Conveniently, it corresponded to her own experimentation in monogamy for a while there. And so then there were some monogamous couples there. But for the 2 OneTaste houses sort of controlled, they were, by the way, controlled largely by Rachel Cherwitz. Nicole was kind of this off mysterious gurus. And for most of that time, monogamy was very frowned upon. So if you came in with a partner, you were expected to rotate over time. Rachel had less control over the communities that were independently founded by just adherence. So that would be all over the map.
Can I follow up briefly, Deborah, if there's not someone waiting to ask a
Does
question?
anyone else have a final question? If not, I'll give it the floor to Cheryl.
Oh, go ahead, Betsy.
A quick question, Betsy. We don't have much time.
My question is the role of charisma. There are certain people who hold a certain kind of charisma. It might be underlyingly sexual, or it might be some other kind of leadership quality. And that I just wondered, when those people either disappear or implode or go crazy, communities what makes a community survive in those instances? So I think all three of you might have some insights into that.
Sounds like Michael wants to go first.
Okay,
Yeah.
Michael, go for it.
Our founder had a lot of charisma.
Yeah.
Found a couple did, but there's a lot of people in the community also have a lot of charisma, and that's why we practiced. That's why we have a structure so that nobody can get more of that. You have to manage charisma. Charisma is something it's a communal thing. If you imagine us as a foraging group, foraging somewhere, like we were for millennia. Some of those people would have been more charismatic, but the group has to manage that. You have leadership in some things, and then you have leadership in other things. And I think what I'm writing about, how do you manage charisma? How do you manage big personalities? You got to have it's a balance thing. Our checks and balances. I hate to use things like that, but that was a better idea than having a king, or a queen.
Does anyone else want to quickly respond to that? Oh, Jonathan, yeah, go for
it. This is called founder syndrome, and it's many initiatives, not just intentional communities, have crashed in founder syndrome. The big character is needed, the big character, to actually push the thing through, but then the complexity becomes too great to be managed by one person. Just a very cute little story from Findhorn, how we got through the founder syndrome dilemma, potential trap, is that the community effectively acted on the basis of Eileen's guidance. She'd go to the local public toilets and she'd sit and meditate and receive what she called the still small voices of God. And she would then convey this to the community, and her husband would intervene, who's a military man, would impose with military vigor. And one day, about a decade in, she came back and said, "My guidance is no more guidance. You got to get your own." And I think that was a pivotal, how consciously she was being wise there, I'm not sure, but it was exactly the right advice. And she spent the rest of her life living at Findhorn while her husband was gone, I think, within about 18 months of that guidance.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just close out. We have a minute, Deborah. The only thing I would add, Betsy, about charisma is it's always a relationship between the individual and the societal norms at the time. Like Nicole would never have been in a position to have the power that she developed if there wasn't this sort of, zeitgeist of the time of, we want women, powerful leaders to take the mantle for where men screwed up before. And so I think very much a lot of people, especially in the Bay Area, would project upon her what they wanted the world to be like. And she was smart enough to be able to harness that for her own good.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much to our speakers. This was a really great session. I want to remind you that there are a couple of links in the chat one to a donation link. If you're able to give us a donation, we would certainly welcome it. There's also a link to the survey so you can give us feedback on the conference. The next session coming up, we have a workshop. There's also a paper session. So I hope you will join us in one of those rooms. Thank you very much.